You might be keeping your own garden journal, but what if it would be better to keep your own almanac? Yeah, it's easier than you think. So let's take a look at the why and the how. So writing a reference book as big as an almanac seems kind of daunting. So why would we put forth that kind of effort into creating our own reference book? And every argument that I'm going to make today all comes down to one argument, and that is there is still value in having your own data. First and foremost, there's still a lot of bits of information that the internet can't tell you, right? The internet can't tell you when your cherry tree set blossoms last year. It can't tell you if that squash you planted in July had enough time to ripen. It can't tell you when the gnats and ticks came out. It can't tell you when the fox had her litter in the back of the woods, right? There are a lot of pieces of information that the internet can't give you. So what's wrong with journaling? Like, why not just journal, right? Well, there's nothing wrong with journaling. Journaling is fantastic. I journal about my garden as well. But journaling creates kind of a narrative style of writing where it becomes almost like autobiographical storytelling. Whereas what I'm proposing here with the Almanac is more of a systematic note taking and taking data that we can then use later to inform our decisions as gardeners. So, for example, the way I've structured my almanac is that I have 2 pages at the beginning of each month for general notes about that month that I usually go back and write at the end of the month. Sometimes I'll make notes in the middle, but generally at the end. And then for every day of the year, I have 1 page. And on that page, I write my notes for that day. And those notes are small. They might include the weather, insect sightings, what I harvested, how many pounds I harvested, things of that nature. And what that does then, having 1 page per day, is that now I can every year write notes on the same day to talk about what's going on. And then as I build those pages across the years, like 5 years down the line, now I have notes on July 1st for 5 years running, and I can go back and see, oh, it has been above 80 or 90 always at this time of year. Or I might look at that and say, oh, last year at this time I was harvesting this, but this year those things aren't ready. So I can build sort of a body of knowledge by taking notes about those particular days and that particular time of year. And then that gives me information that I can compare. And so this is about developing your own reference book that you can reference the events and data that you've collected on your own garden. So this is how I decided to format this. I bought a blank journaling book of 400 pages, and then for each month I have 2 pages for general notes that I put at the beginning of the month. And you can see I can just make a general note each year or a couple notes per year and still have plenty of room for multiple years. And then after the 2 general pages, I just have 1 page per day. And you can see my journal entries, or in this case, almanac entries, are short, right? Each of these only takes a few minutes per day. And they detail the things that are important to me that I'm choosing to record for my almanac. I'm looking at weather events, like this entry here says rain and thunderstorms. And I'm looking at what my harvests are. In this case, I harvested tomatoes, jalapenos, Tabascos, cayenne peppers, and dried cowpeas. And that helps me to know year to year when these things are going to come ripe.
So next year, when I plant the same types of vegetables, I can look back through my almanac and say, oh, those came ripe in September. That's when I'm going to be harvesting those, and then I can plan for that, ideally. So I just do a quick journal entry on each day. And some of them are small. On some days when I don't have a lot of time or don't have much to say, I might do a quick and easy one like this. This just says early morning, deep rain. That's it. That's my entire notes on that day. And other days I might take more notes if I've noticed something interesting in how the insects are behaving, or if, something like a giant tortoise laid eggs in the garden. I might make extra notes about that. But don't feel obligated to write an essay. This is a daily habit, and it should take about 5 to 10 minutes. And that's it, to make a small note. And if you're saying, Jess, I didn't even go out in the garden today, how can I make notes about that? Well, did you look out the window? Did you leave the house? Did you go to your car and back? The very least you can do is a weather note, right? You can put down the temperature, you can put down the general weather. If you looked out the window, maybe you noticed a certain thing was in bloom. Maybe you saw hummingbirds on the flowers, right? There's always something you can put down about each day. And this is about making observations. And that's it. That's as hard as it is, guys. And if you look at the space we have on these pages, this means that I can probably use this book for about 10 years, depending on how big my entries are. If they're small, I can use it for a lot more than 10 years, but if they're larger, I'm probably going to get about 10 years out of this book. But can you imagine how much I'm going to know about my property 10 years down the line when this book starts filling up?
Essentially, what we're creating here is a case study of your property, right? Not everything that happens in all gardening is relevant to you and your goals as a gardener. So, for example, some of you might be gardening for profit. Some of you might be gardening as a homestead to feed your family. You might be gardening because you're trying to create a wildlife habitat and help to save endangered pollinators. Everyone has their own reasons. And because of that, before you start your almanac, you want to think about what data is most important to you and how you are going to measure that, right? Some of you might want to be very heavily number driven, right? You want to know how many pounds of produce you made, that you harvested during the year. Some of you might want to know and track the high and low temperatures throughout the entire year, right? But some of you might want to take measurements in other ways. Maybe your measurements are in butterfly sightings if you're trying to create a pollinator garden. Maybe you're a canner and you're canning fruits and vegetables to make jams and jellies and pickles, and the only measurement that matters to you is how many jars did I pack, right? So you need to think about what's important to you and how you want to measure it. And once you've decided those things, then it's just a little daily habit, right? The little daily habit of sitting down at the beginning of the day or the end of the day, depending on when you have time, and just writing down a few sentences. You might jot a little note about the weather, or you might put down a note about what you harvested that day and how much. You might make notes about not only your harvest quality, but your harvest quantity, right? So if your harvest of apples this year gave you more pounds of apples, but the apples were smaller and more bitter, then recording the quality is important as well. So you just want to think about what your values are in this case and what information you find most useful. And that's the great thing, because you just get to design this book. For my almanac, I chose a large blank journal to use, but there are a lot of different ways you can go about this. If you prefer, for example, to use a computer, you could have a long running document in Word or Google Docs that you can just add information to every day if that's more comfortable for you. There are also other things you can include. So you can include photographs, you can include drawings and sketches. You can include tables for those of you who like making tables. Some of you out there are Excel junkies. You know who you are, right? I'm personally not that organized, but some of you are going to love that. You're going to make an Excel table all about the pounds that you harvested in the last year, and then you're going to make one next year, and then you're going to compare the results and get all nerdy about it. So you know who you are. If that's what you want to do it. But each of us can take our notes in the way that best suits our goals and also our styles of learning. So if you want your almanac to be more of a log of the wild plants and flowers and insects, and you want to include sketches of those things as you see them, or photographs, then that's something you can do. Or if you want more data, you can create your own tables. However you choose to make your almanac, that's how you can do it. And you can do that as a hard copy, paper, pencil. I'm writing everything down, I'm drawing things myself, or you can do that on a computer, whatever's most comfortable for you. I chose the paper pencil version, but you do you. So what types of things could you put in this almanac? You could have planting times, sprouting times, harvesting times. You can have your harvest yields. You can have when your plants die off. You can log pests, diseases, insect sighting, animal sightings, natural disasters, weather events. And on the topic of weather, like, you could create your own weather station and record that. And creating your own weather station would only include getting yourself a thermometer, a rain gauge, maybe a pressure gauge and a windsock. And all of a sudden now you have the ability to log and track all of those things if that's something that interests you. You can track the moon phases if you're a gardener who gardens by phases of the moon. There's really no end to the types of information that you could choose to log in your almanac. And if you have any suggestions that you would like to put in the comments below, maybe I missed something, or maybe you have a really cool idea, definitely put that down there so that other gardeners can benefit from each other's ideas. That'd be fantastic. The Almanac's also a really great tool to start recording and also identifying new insects in your yard, like this weird little guy with his creepy flesh tone skin and his candy wrapper markings and spikes. Yeah, insects in the South, man. Look at the egg pattern on this piece of okra. Perfect hexagon. 3 eggs on each side. By recording these things, you can start to identify which insects are beneficial, which ones aren't, what their damage looks like. Like, you might be able to eventually spot, like, when I see these sorts of patterns on a leaf, I know that is this insect doing that damage. So it's also a tool for just learning to record and identify your observations so that in the future, you know what the problem is. You can troubleshoot. One of the important reasons for keeping our own data is that it can help us to identify trends or lack thereof. For example, harbingers. Harbingers, like certain plants and animals, can help us know when seasonal changes are about to take place. things like the crocus coming up in the spring, or the dogwood trees turning red with their fall colors before any other tree begins to change. And these things help to signal seasonal changes. There are other things as well that we can notice in trends in our own yard. So, for example, I've been recording monarch butterfly sightings, and I've noticed that these butterflies are always spotted on my cosmo flowers. So if one of the things that I was trying to do, let's say I had a pollinator garden and my purpose in gardening was to attract certain pollinators like monarch butterflies, then that kind of information would tell me that maybe I need to plant more cosmo flowers next year to continue to attract these butterflies.
Don't forget to like and subscribe and ring that notification bell.
So if one of your priorities, for example, is foraging some of the wild plants in your area, keeping records can be really important, because then you can be prepared for the harvest. I mean, how can I put my dandelions to good use if I don't know when they're sprouting and I don't know when they're flowering? Likewise, how can I make violet jelly or forage for mushrooms if I don't know when those things emerge? If I'm not keeping records, I can't know. Another reason to keep your own records is to determine patterns of weather. I mean, really, how accurate is your weather app or your local weatherman? Like, really. If you're a gardener spending time outside, then you're probably noticing things like cloud movement, wind direction, bird behavior. A lot of those things can help you to understand what weather is coming, whether your weather app says it's there or not. So, for example, the other day, I noticed that an entire flock of birds moved up into a tree in the same moment. And then they all looked in the same direction and started chattering. And when I looked in that direction, I saw lightning. So I noted that as a piece of bird behavior and recorded it so that now in the future, when I see birds moving and chattering in that same fashion, that might be a signal to me that a thunderstorm is coming. Here in my yard, on my property, I notice that every now and then we have a total reversal of wind direction. And it's been my observation that when we have that total reversal, there's often a hurricane on the coast. And in that case, our weather comes in from a completely different direction, whereas it normally comes in from the southwest. When there are hurricanes on the coast, sometimes it comes at us from the northeast. And that's just something that I've noticed through observation and is the kind of thing that you could write down in your almanac. Like, when do I have total reversals in wind direction and what's going on when that happens?
Here's another entry, this one in June, and you can see I'm talking about which plants are ready, which are setting fruit, which are looking healthy, and a brief note about the weather. And this is it. This is all we're talking about, keeping a little itty bitty daily log to note the information about your plants and property and the weather that are important to you.
Another thing to think about is who this reference book is ultimately for, right? While you might on the one hand, be creating an almanac for yourself as a reference so you can remember, like, when did my sunflowers blossom last year? Um, when did my Tabasco peppers ripen, right? You also might want to look at it as something for future stewards of your land. So, for example, maybe you have one of your children who's going to inherit your property, or maybe you don't, and you want to make sure that the people who come and steward this land after you have some kind of manual to let them know what has worked and what doesn't work, and when certain things happen on the property and how to recognize them happening. So, this almanac can be a useful tool for future stewards of your land. Um, and as far as inheritance and heirlooms go, um, just think about for a moment a relative that has passed and gone, someone who was special to you, and think about how cool it would be if you had a book that detailed their daily lives, that looked at what chores they were doing that day, their thoughts about them, how excited they were when a certain flower bloomed, or how they always paid attention to the migrations of geese or whatever, and what kind of sentimental value that would have for you to be able to read that book, right? So you can look at it that way for future generations. Also, because you're keeping an almanac, you might notice some local trends, and that will make you a better resource to other local gardeners. Sorry about that little camera wiggle. It was the cat. Also, think about yourself and your almanac as a resource for other people. So, for example, if you're part of a garden club, or if you just want to be able to help other local gardeners, well, by keeping an almanac, you will begin to notice certain trends, and you might be able to give other gardeners or farmers or homesteaders um, better advice, because you've already done that work. You've already trialed the thing that didn't work. You've already discovered the breed of tomato plant that does really well here. And because of that, you can give better advice to other gardeners who are trying to do the same thing. So consider that as well, that this isn't just a reference for you, it could be a reference for a lot of people. So, if you are a gardener of any kind, no matter what your motivations are, no matter what your technique of gardening is, I would encourage you to start this little habit. It just takes a few minutes every day. And don't beat yourself up if you miss a few days. You know, in the almanac that I'm creating, I've missed days here or there this year, but keep at it. And habits are not always easy to build when they're new, and just be forgiving of yourself and just make those little notes daily. If you miss a day, go back today. If you missed yesterday, go back and record something you noticed yesterday. But the point is start making little observations, make little recordings, right? And as you go, eventually you're going to build a whole body of knowledge. You're going to know so much about your property and about your garden. You're going to know about what you can expect from your harvests. Like, you'll know that a certain tree will give you a maximum of X amount of fruit, but maybe every third year doesn't fruit at all, right? You're gonna know all kinds of stuff, and it's all from a very small habit. So just write little notes every day about your observations in the garden, whether it's weather or insects or harvests or sprouting, whatever it is. And then at the end of every month, maybe write a paragraph of something that you noticed or thought about. Maybe this July seemed drier than normal, or hotter, or more rainy, right? Ours was kind of hotter and more rainy here. But the point is that if you do this over the years, you're going to have a very extensive body of knowledge to pull from, that you're not racking your brains for and asking yourself, when was that really big hailstorm? And what year was that when the greenhouse blew down? And, information like that. You'll just have it right there and you can look it up because you've created your own reference book, your own almanac. How cool is that?